And so the title for the webinar today is Futures of Basic Income in 2030. And we're still advocating for a form of basic income in Canada. And so I'm gonna let Eugenia introduce the OCIC webpage.
Thanks, Tina. And this is probably not your first time interacting with OCIC, but just in case, I'm gonna let you know what we do and what we are. So OCIC stands for the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, and we are a network of civil society organizations, institutions, and people working towards sustainable development. And our OCIC's Youth Policymakers Hub is a multi-generational community led by youth, which you see here and which you've seen in the last couple of weeks, organizing around issues that are important to them. And so this basic income piece is one of the issues that they've come together to talk more about, research, and definitely advocate for in different ways. So we're quite excited to be holding this community in some way, shape, or form and supporting the issues that matter to youth and sustainable development. So passing it back to you, Tina.
Hello.
Over here.
Hello, everyone. So here we have the Basic Income Project team who have been responsible for the series of webinars that have been going on this summer. It consists of Arjorie, Eric, Johanna, Safa, Christina, who will be doing the webinar today, and myself, Farah. So before we get into it, given the context in which the OCIC and the Hub operates, in Ontario, Canada, the city of Toronto, from the Haudenosaunee word Tikaranto, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and ancestral territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, a territory covered by the Toronto Purchase of 1787, the 1805 indenture, and most recently, the 2010 settlement, now home to a diversity of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous from across Turtle Island. Recognizing that this is a land acknowledgement for where the presenters of this webinar are situated on today, but not necessarily where you are tuning into this webinar from, or even perhaps where you normally live and work. We encourage you to find out which land treaty, if any, covers the Indigenous of Turtle Island territories you're on. And of course, if you're outside of Turtle Island, we encourage you to consider if there are other land treaties or lack thereof that affect the context of the geography in which you live and work and your positionality and relationship to those treaties. So a little housekeeping first. First of all, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please place them in the Q&A box. Please keep all of your comments and remarks in the chat box respectful, as this is a place for learning. And we must recognize that we are all at different points along the learning path and maintain space open for the growth with patience, kindness, and compassion. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and breakout rooms will not be recorded. And we hope you enjoy this webinar. Our lead facilitator today, who is part of the BI team, is Christina Muia. She's part of the OCIC Youth Policy Hub. She's a member of the Association for Professional Futurists, and she's a Master of Design graduate from the Strategic Foresight and Innovation Program at OCAD University. Finally, she's the Ontario Partnership and Outreach Lead at the Rising Youth Program at Taking It Global.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Farah. And looking at the agenda today, we're going to walk you through a few points. The first being the purpose of the webinar, why future thinking matters, and why we chose to use this tool today. And we're going to look at some of the trends and drivers that could make our basic income a reality in Canada. And we also discuss 3 future scenarios that we'll actually do in the breakout rooms with the BI project team as facilitators. And we'll come back to the large group to share key insights and also take your questions. And then, of course, we'll cover how to stay involved after this webinar is done, since it's our last one. And before we jump into all that, we'd like for you to answer a simple multiple choice question on Slido. So just type in slido.com and just fill in the event code that you see on the screen. That should take you a minute. It's a simple question. Let us know if you can't access the Slido. If you have any questions, feel free to also let Eliza know. She'll support you with any technical difficulties as well, on Zoom specifically. All right, so I think most people have answered the question. Oh wow, so everybody says, well, most people are saying yes, and 9% are saying maybe. Okay. Well, thank you for filling out the poll. We are hoping that we'll change the 10% mind by the end of the presentation. But it's great to see that most of you in the webinar are are in support of formal basic income. And then we're going to jump to the next question now. How will receiving $2,000 a month impact your life? This can be a short answer, it can be a long answer. Just feel free to give the response that best suits you in your situation. I'll give you guys another minute to respond to that. And I believe you can give multiple answers to this as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Eric.
Correct. You should be able to put more than one answer, so don't hesitate to jot them all down.
Christina or someone, could you announce the Slido's code verbally so those who join by phone or cannot see your slides will be able to participate?
All right. Yes, sorry about that. The Slido event code is 22950. So if you're joining in by through your phone, if you're calling in, the number is 22950. And I think also you can add it in the chat for those of you who are joining through your phone or through a mobile.
Thanks, Tina. And the website is www.sli.do, just in case.
These are some of the answers that are coming in. Buying more quality food and potentially get a better housing. Retired, so we'll be back. Pension pandemic, less financial anxiety. I'll be more inclined to take entrepreneurial risk to finally establish a social enterprise startup. All right. So most people are actually responding. Most of the responses that are coming in are mostly based on being able to be more food secure, being able to be more house secure, which I think is a challenge for a lot of people who are either unemployed or unemployed, especially young people who are in precarious employment. Face issues in terms of being able to afford housing, and just being able to have more financial freedom. I think that's which will change a lot of people's lives as well. All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll share this back. You'll be able to access the recording as well at the end of this webinar, maybe in another week. So you should be able to see those responses again. All right. So we'll jump into the session. So what's the purpose of this webinar? Why did we choose to do it this way, and why does it matter? You can go to the next slide, Eric. So it's an opportunity for us to imagine alternative futures where a form of basic income is a reality in Canada. And we're hoping that what we work on together here will be able to inform basic income policy design. And this webinar builds upon the conversations and discussions we have had in the last 3 webinars, but you don't need to have attended all webinars or have expertise to share your insights. We're hoping that everyone will be open to sharing their knowledge, their lived experiences, professional experiences in the breakout sessions. It's an opportunity for you to kind of think creatively and outside the box regarding how basic income could be designed so that no one is left behind, and we're in alignment with the SDGs. Due to the focus of the Youth Policymakers Hub, we will discuss different topics, but we'll mostly focus on gender equality, youth empowerment, and advancing the 2030 UN SDG agenda. So why does future thinking matter, and why did we end up choosing this tool? Because there's so many, design tools we could have used out there. There's so many tools we could have used to engage this last webinar. So why did we choose future thinking specifically? There's a connection between how the past was, how the present is, and how the futures that we anticipate are going to be as well. So I'm sure you've heard the saying that goes, history repeats itself. And the idea is that when you look at past events, it can help you predict future events. And how you're living in the present will also affect the type of futures you're likely to have. And I mean, most people already know this, like the actions that you take on today will affect the future that you're gonna have tomorrow. And so, what you do today will affect your future. And it's also a key tool in supporting the development of insights and strategies to support basic income policy design. And as I mentioned before, it's a process that helps us think about and reimagine alternative futures together so that we can start moving towards an ideal and sustainable future. And I just wanted to add that we're not here to predict the future. Like, future thinking is not about saying that we know what the future holds, because no one really does. The idea here is to facilitate the conversations and help people think differently about probable and plausible futures that we can expect. And so we built our team's ideal future before we ended up building the scenarios that you're going to see later. And what our team hopes for in terms of the future is that we will have a society where a form of basic income is a reality. We'll have a society where people have an equal opportunity to thrive. We'll have a society with eliminated monetary poverty. There'll be improved well-being, equitable access to services for everyone, and of course, a green and sustainable economy. So many people on this webinar are young people who are worried about their futures due to precarious employment, climate changes, and uncertain economic outlook. And we know that the ideal and sustainable future looks different for everyone. That's why having our insights in the breakout rooms will be beneficial. So having your insights in the breakout rooms will be beneficial in helping us shape those ideal futures we all want to see. So this begs the question: why does future thinking matter? And why are we why are we using this tool again? And the idea is that we live in a complex, volatile, ambiguous, and uncertain world. And as we've seen with the pandemic, things will change. I mean, things change really quickly. And right now, nobody knows what the next couple of months or the next year holds in terms of how we're ever going to get back to a normal that we used to know a few months ago. And so the idea is that future thinking helps us, flip this image to one that's going to give us clarity, understanding, an ability to make quick and agile decisions, and ability to have a vision and plan for the future. So the idea is that we're gonna be able to flip the image from complexity to clarity, volatility to vision, ambiguity to agility, and uncertainty to understanding. And we decided to, since the focus of the Youth Policymakers Hub is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, a blueprint that's meant to achieve a better and more sustainable future for everyone. The SDG agenda, as most of you know, has a deadline of 2030, with an overarching theme of not leaving anyone behind. So we chose to keep our futures consistent with the SDG agenda. That's why all the future scenarios we discussed today are set in 2030, so 10 years from now. And we're going to dive into some of the trends that are happening today that are likely to continue in the next 10 years. And we chose just a few of them to discuss today. So the first one is globalization and hyperconnectivity. Many of you already know that we live in a globalized world and it's hyperconnected. We're always on our devices. the ability of people to move from one province to another, one state to another, one country to another is a norm now. People do that all the time and they travel all the time. And this trend is likely to continue in the next few years. Maybe not so much in the next few months because of the pandemic, but I'm sure once the pandemic is over, people are going to continue traveling as much as they were before. And there's also a likelihood for us to see more pandemics in the future as well. COVID-19 is linked to biodiversity disturbance, which is an issue likely to increase globally as contacts between humans and wild animals increase. So activities like land clearing for agriculture, for example, or deforestation are just a few examples of biodiversity disturbance. We had SARS in 2002. We had the swine flu in 2009. We had MERS in 2012, the bird flu in 2013, Ebola in 2014, the Zika virus in 2015, and obviously COVID-19, which is today, in 2020. So because we already had all those pandemics happen in the last decade, the likelihood of them happening the next decade is, not too far away. Actually, it's a possibility, and that's the idea of the trend analysis. And we're also likely to see rapid technological advancement. This has been going on, for a couple of years now, and it's likely to continue. Jobs are going to become automated and will continue to become automated as artificial intelligence is increasingly used in many aspects of our lives, as well as organizations deciding to adopt artificial intelligence to monitor and refine business processes. New jobs are also likely to be created in a post-artificial intelligence world. Oh, sorry, Eric, could you go back to the previous slide, 21? The previous one. Oh yeah, that one, yeah, thank you. And as many of you know, most services in Toronto are getting really expensive. Like housing is really expensive. Food is also, getting expensive as well. Transportation. Those living in Toronto or other large cities can relate to that and can relate to the rising housing prices. And the challenge is that income has barely increased in the last decade to reflect the increased standard of living that we're experiencing. And some families and individuals are struggling to make ends meet, even in situations where both parents are both working. There's been a trend of incorporating a social justice lens across government policies. During the other basic income webinars, for example, some of the panelists brought up the gender and race lens that should be incorporated in policy making and processes. And we also see like Global Affairs Canada, for example, adopted the FIAP in 2017, which is the Feminist International Assistance Policy that seeks to empower women and girls in low and middle income countries. The government has also announced funding for Indigenous-led organizations and female-led organizations as well. And in the work of Black Lives Matter protests, we have seen a need to collect race-based data to inform health policies, and more funding is being allocated to Black-led organizations as well. And so we're hoping that this is a trend that will also continue happening in the next few years. Now we'll jump into drivers. So what are some of the drivers we're currently seeing that could push the government to make basic income a reality? So as advocates, it's an opportunity for us to look at ways that we can use these potential drivers and what's happening out in the real world to be able to advocate more for basic income and use that in writing. And so like the first example is, we know that there's gonna be a recession happening, and I mean, economists are predicting a recession in the next few months or even a year. Many people are likely to be unemployed or underemployed. People in precarious employment, who are usually young people, are likely to be impacted by job losses. And this means increased food security, which is an issue that a lot of you mentioned. Housing insecurity, poverty will increase, decrease health and welfare, and even increase mental health challenges due to an uncertain economic outlook. And as we saw, like how the government quickly put together the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, in March when the pandemic happened, it kind of it shows us that the Canadian government is actually able to put together a form of basic income really quickly, and have the most marginalized and vulnerable citizens being able to access that. So we know this is a possibility in the federal government's agenda. We're not too far from that. And from the first webinar that Adri and Eric were discussing, like the foundations of basic income, we saw that the Ontario Basic Income Pilot in 2017 and the Manitoba Basic Annual Income Experiments in the 1970s revealed multiple benefits for the recipients of basic income. There was decreased poverty, improved health outcomes, improved food and housing security, and also improved welfare for families, among others. We also seen an increased social support for basic income. Organizations like Basic Income Canada Network, for example, UBI Works, the Basic Income Canada Youth Network advocating for basic income. And we've seen CEOs, players in the civil sector. We've seen groups around the country on social media, advocating for BI as well. And also the attendance in these webinars have also shown us that people are really getting curious and are interested in understanding what basic income really means and how it could actually impact their lives. And as you saw, like on the second panel, we had two politicians who were on the panel, and as you had them say, there's an increased political will and support across the country. We've seen several senators advocating for basic income, and we've seen a lot of support for basic income in Eastern and Western Canada, where different parties are working together to make this a reality. And lastly, we are seeing an increased support for basic income on an international level. Countries around the world are testing and trying to implement basic income. Some have done that successfully, others are still trying out, and others have failed. But this has mostly happened as a result of the pandemic. And it's a chance for us to use some of these drivers that we're seeing to push the government to implement basic income in Canada. And now we're going to jump into the futures of basic income in 2030. As I mentioned before, no one can predict the future, but we can imagine several alternative futures that we can anticipate for and be prepared for as a society. So we'll be exploring 3 possible alternative futures today. And these are scenarios that the team created. And scenario 1 will look at increased supports for the most vulnerable to improve the ability to access basic needs and social services. The second scenario will look at how basic income can support the most vulnerable in society. And the third one we'll explore basic income for everyone, regardless of the socioeconomic status. That's the universal basic income. And the idea here is that even though all these scenarios look different and the approaches are different, the goals are ultimately the same. All these scenarios we all hope that they will help us, eradicate poverty in society, and also that there will be improved welfare for everyone. And so now we're going to jump into the breakout rooms, and yeah, I'll have Safa assign everyone into a breakout room. And so now we're gonna jump into more Slido questions, and just like to know from you guys, what was your key takeaway from the sessions that you just had, the discussion that you had in the breakout rooms? And we just activated that question, and just gonna read out the event code for those of you who are listening in. The event code is 22950. And again, the event code is 22950. So feel free to go ahead and answer the question. It doesn't have to be a long answer. It can be very short and quick. However you want to answer it. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to respond to that. So the link is www.sli.do.com. For those of you who can access it. Thank you, Ajay, for sharing that. This is on the chat. I'll give you one more, maybe 2 more minutes. And feel free to add more questions to the chat as well. If you have any regarding the sessions that you just had and any concerns you have, feel free to add them to the chat. All right, just a couple more seconds, and we're going to close that poll. Thank you so much everyone for responding. All right. Yeah, thank you for that. And now we'll dive into the next question. What 3 benefits are likely to happen if we implement a form of basic income in our society today? And you can also answer that on Slido, and the event code has changed now. It's 98100. Then the event code is 98100. And it's also added in the chat as well. So I'll give you 2 minutes to respond to that. Thank you, Eric, for sharing that in the chat. Okay. People feel more fulfilled with their career choices. That's correct. That's part of what we talked about in the past webinar. More inclusive and less peer pressure, better freedom of choices. Similar to the fast response, reduce barriers to receiving mental health support services. Healthier, more sustainable lifestyles for low-income middle class, less stress for caregivers, more accountability and distribution of wealth from high to low net worth. I think that's a really good that really captures, the 3 main benefits that we can see, especially people who are living in vulnerable situations: financial freedom, increased purchasing power, more intentional use of time for each individual. Doing that. Dignity for all citizens, greater financial freedom, employers will offer more attractive jobs. Yeah, I like all these responses. And I think the basic idea is that, a form of basic income will, allow people who are living in more vulnerable situations to have more financial freedom and more of a choice than they ever did before. And I will just step into the next question.
Perhaps a couple more seconds.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being so patient and for filling in the answers. And this webinar is recorded, so you'll also be able to see the responses later on if you'd like to access them as well for your own work or your own advocacy. Okay, thank you, Eric, for that. And I will jump to the next question. What are the 3 challenges likely to happen if the government implements basic income today? What do you think would be the key challenge? I know someone mentioned in the breakout room we were in that the administrative side of things is always a challenge for governments. Does anybody else have any other ideas of what will be the main challenge for government? And the event code is still 98100. The only 2 more questions left, so it won't be all our 4 questions. We'll get into discussion in a few minutes. And again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to add them in the chat. I can respond to those as they come in. All right, people taking advantage of it, costing and taxes, the design of other social benefits in the ecosystem. Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Like the idea of whether the government will be able to either choose, like keep the existing social services or social benefits that are in place right now, or get rid of those to actually implement basic income. That would be interesting to see, and how much it will cost. Of course, that's always a concern. And someone mentioned actually in the group that I was in that, you know, there's a possibility for, if you're really trying to fund this program, to move the funding from the 1% who, you know, earn a lot, and actually use that to cover the taxes that would be used for basic income. So that could be, you know, one possibility. Cultural shift to end stigma against recipients of welfare. Securing increased corporate and ultra wealthy tax reforms, ensuring systems in place to execute smoothly. Yes, so we're hoping the design of this will be very similar to the child benefit and old age benefit programs that are in place right now. How it's you know, based on how it's based on your taxes, when you do your taxes and how much return you get. Since it's based on your income, that would be an easy way for the government to monitor that. And, you know, will kind of be carried out by the CRA once you file in your taxes. And so just being able to include, you know, people aged between 18 and 64 to be able to access that as well, like what's being given to children and people who are in old age. All right. Using government, okay. Yeah, that's actually, that's always a good point, you know, for, you know, when governments change, what does that mean for the existing program in place? Classism, inflation, practical difficulties getting BI to those accessibility issues, yeah. I'm sure also some of you are wondering, you know, how this will get to everyone in society, especially the most marginalized. But I think, you know, with the idea of using the CRA as like how they give returns with the CRA, I think that would be a good way for most people to access it. But for sure, there's always going to be someone who will fall through the cracks. So the question is, how do we include them as well within, you know, the design of it? All right, thank you so much for that, Eric. I think we can jump into the last question, and this is a multiple choice question, so it's going to only take a minute for you to answer this. It's very quick. Would you like to see a a guaranteed livable income implemented in Canada. And feel free to unmute yourself if you said yes, or if you said yes, or if you said maybe. We'd like to hear your perspectives or on why you think, where you're unsure of why it should be implemented or why you think it should be implemented. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions or we'll just talk. So the GLI is a guaranteed livable income. So that means that if you fall below a certain income level, then you will get the return from the CRA if you file your taxes. So, that only means that you have to be under a certain income level. So if you're making more than that, then of course you won't get it. But if at some point in your life you end up making less, then you will definitely get it. So the idea is that everybody is eligible for it, but you only have to fall under a certain income level. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and just sort of discuss why you think guaranteed livable income should be implemented today, or if you have any other questions as well, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead, Letitia. Yeah.
Would a livable income be determined by region? Because what's livable in Toronto is not, what's livable in Renfrew, Ontario is not livable in Toronto.
That's a good point, and that's something that we can include. We can include when we're in our advocacy letter. Because I guess it won't be the same for each city and across the entire country. It's going to differ. So, yeah, for sure, there should be some kind of customization based on the city or where you live as well. Because I'm sure like the standard of living in Toronto is not the same as a small, rural, remote town in Ontario. So there has to be some changes adjusted as well.
Sorry. So there'll be conversations, Letitia, around what measure do you use? Is it LICO, low income cutoff? Is it the basket measure? So it would have to be some universally agreed upon and acceptable measure for this to work, because you are right. What is a livable income varies from town to town, province to province.
And also year to year.
Thank you for sharing that, Camille.
And that came up in our group actually as well. And just thinking about it now as you're sharing it is perhaps one way to go around that is it being administered or assessed at the municipal level, almost like in cooperation with federally administered, but calculated.
Okay, yeah, I think that could work in terms of the customization, because if it's done on a federal level, it's it's not going to be easy to kind of adapt it to the different areas and different needs. Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything to the conversation?
Yeah, perhaps that could be also reviewed as economy, changes throughout time. So like say annually by the government to review the program, and make new targets. Yeah.
We hope that if we can advocate for the government right now to implement a form of basic income, then hopefully with the next government it will change. Hopefully everything will be put in place and it will be hard to change that.
So sorry, I'm just trying to understand that previous question about it being reviewed each year and being changed depending on, sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that question. Because I was thinking that whatever that agreed measure is, that universally applied agreed measure, the next step would perhaps be to index that to inflation, for it to have relevance with each, with each period and changes in time.
Yeah.
Well, there was also a discussion about it being decided by certain governments. So because the amount would be different, I guess, in different countries. So depending on how the economy is doing in Canada or in Greece or anywhere, you know, you would review that, because perhaps now we can afford 2,000 because that's how much we sort of judge that someone can survive with, but maybe in the next few years the prices will be different, and so we need to reflect that. It was more in, I guess it's more technical, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a question, which is slightly kind of going back to basic income. During our conversation and also in this poll, I read a lot of people talking about how then people keep the motivation to work, and are people still gonna be working, and people that nowadays have to go between two jobs and this and that. So I was wondering, how would, instead of promoting a basic income, also decide on increasing the job market or making sure that the basic salary are higher, so that you don't necessarily need to think about accountability, also because the costs related to ensuring a basic income are quite high. It's not only paying, but it's also all just administrative work that is behind. So there should be also a thought about, I don't know, increasing the job market, or something that is also maybe a little bit more related. Also because people need to do something in their life, need to feel that they are actually working and active for the society, not only receiving money. So I think there's these two things that also need to be taken into account.
Yeah, and the idea is not that basic income will make people not want to work. I mean, as we saw with the Ontario basic income pilot, like people were working and they moved on to, you know, better jobs, or jobs that were actually able to support them and their families. So people were actually better able to move into better situations because they were receiving basic income. So the idea is that just because people are receiving a certain amount of money every month, they don't stop working. They will still continue to work. But of course, you know, I can't speak for every single person in society. I can only speak for the majority, that, and what we've seen from the studies that have been conducted in the past. Yeah, and I do agree with you. Like, there is also something to be said about increasing salary as well. Like, because you know, the income level hasn't increased that much over the last decade, so there should be something to be said about increasing that as well. So people can be more motivated to, you know, continue working and being productive in society as well.
Can I say something too about jobs? Do we need a McDonald's and a Tim Hortons and all those fast food places that create so many McJobs? Do we need so many of those? Maybe people won't want those jobs anymore if they have a basic income that's livable. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's a good thing. I think if we're talking transformative changes, we're looking at a different job market.
Yeah.
And as Kenneth Galbraith said way back when, not everybody needs to work in our society to be able to live. Mm-hmm. There's volunteer work, there's creative work, there's working overseas and development projects. There's all kinds of ways that people can occupy themselves in meaningful ways and satisfying ways without having a job. We're looking at basic income as part of the gig economy, but I think basic income will change the gig economy.
I like that point a lot, because part of the reason why we're advocating for this, if you were here for the very first webinar, is that, you know, Eric and Andrew were kind of mentioning how, you know, people are able to get more freedom, financial freedom, to do the things that they feel most passionate about. So, for example, like if you're in care work, for example, or if you want to volunteer with the time, you don't feel like you now have to make money to do that. Like, people in society can actually pursue the things that they feel most passionate about and that they feel their strengths are aligned with. And so we're hoping, like, I'm not saying that this is 100% true, but we're going to have a happier society when people receive a basic income that will allow them to choose. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that point.
I would like to add something to the part that if you have basic income, then you don't want to work for a fast food because that doesn't pay as well, and plus you have the choice not to work to it. I think if you have basic income, that's going to shift the way fast food industries pay workers and the environment they create. They will need to be competitive to to make people come work for them, and in this way improve the working conditions for those that work there. So it's going to bring that shift in a good sense as well, because then they will pay more, but also make sure that they don't overwork their workers or things like that. But I think it's an important point to mention that we need to incentivize workers.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing that view, because it's something certainly from a political standpoint and a policy-making standpoint that decision makers grapple with, right? Ensuring that while you preserve human dignity and an understanding that every human life is valuable and has a place in society, you do not want to disincentivize work. Right? So it's striking that balance. What's the secret sauce in the policy mix that allows us to strike that balance? And certainly in the world as it is currently constructed, there's a race to the bottom very often in the quality of work that's being provided. And when we think about the basic income, we cannot think about it in a vacuum. We then have to look at what are the employment laws and standards, rules and regulations around work. Where are the gaps that need to be filled? What are the laws that need to be updated as we look at what's happening now? There's a huge precarity of employment. A lot of people are working, but what kind of work are they engaged in order to preserve some semblance of human dignity? Many people are working in excess of 40 hours a day, but still living below the poverty line. You know, so we have to look at the quality of work that's being provided, the kinds of wages that are being provided. We have to look at the legal regulatory landscape that exists right now that governs work and employment contracts. And those also have to be dealt with in tandem with what a potential BI could look like, because the BI can't just work in a vacuum, because the reality is that people will work and people need to work. So I think we need to look at both sides of it.
Thank you for sharing that, Camille. I think we're running out of time because it's almost 1:30. So we'll just move on to the next slide. Unless anybody else has a burning question that they think that they must ask and they can't leave without asking. All right. So we're hoping you know, that you guys are going to be able to tweet this to a member of parliament. It's a very simple tweet. So a basic income policy is relevant to all Canadians today because what do you think is the most important thing about having a basic income policy in Canada today? And you don't have to tweet if you don't want to. And I know a few of you mentioned that they hate Twitter, so that's okay, we understand. But those of you who like being on social media, feel free to tweet this and, you know, include the senator and the prime minister and, you know, the other party leaders as well, and OCIC as well.
Through Lead Now and 350 Canada, a bunch of us across Canada are trying to organize meetings with our MPs, like constituent meetings, to talk about a just recovery. And basic income is a big part of that discussion. But I've been trying for 3 weeks now to organize a meeting with Mona Fortier, and I have had no reply. And there's a bunch of us now. We're at least a dozen of her constituents trying to get a meeting with her, and she's just ignoring us. But we're not going to give up.
Thank you for sharing that, Leticia. I think we'll move on to the next slide. If Eric, you know, feels like it's really answered the question, so I'll let Eric take it from here. Thank you, everyone.
All right. So how can you stay involved? This may be the last event, but it's not the last occasion. So here we've got a few options. First and foremost, be sure to subscribe to the Ontario Council for International Cooperation's newsletter, that is OCIC. That's where you'll get more information on future events like this from them. Most importantly, the next big thing is a day of action, which will be in early August. So the date is to be determined, but by subscribing to this newsletter, you'll be made known of that date once it's determined. And essentially it's a day where you can send a letter to your MP. It'll be folks from across Canada. It'll be a public event, and it will have 3 templates based on some of the conversations we've had here today and in other webinars. So kind of whatever motivates you the most, and that could be your starting point to then customize the letter and send it in, or just send as is. More details to come. Of course, this is the end, the closing or wrapping up of the Youth Policy Hub for this year at the end of August. So after sending that letter, so kind of funneling you guys to the Basic Income Canada Youth Network for those who want to stay involved, for those who are youth, and of course the broader one, Basic Income Canada Network, or BIEN Earth Network, whatever suits your fancy, or all 3, as I am subscribed, to kind of stay involved in this in a larger capacity beyond August. But sure enough, we are collaborating with the BICYN, as well as the Canadian Council for Young Feminists, or Conseil Canadien de Jeunes Femmes, for this letter to your MP day of action that we'll be having in early August. So all that will come through both newsletter venues. So if you subscribe to both, you'll be hard to miss it. And we look forward to seeing you there. So with that in mind, a wise quote from former US President Barack Obama: "We choose hope over fear. We see the future not as something out of our control, but as something we can shape for the better through concerted and collective effort." Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you there in early August.